Topic 3, all about the green revolution. And I'm sorry to break the news to you, but when we hear the green things, we think environmentally sound, we think good for our earth. Green revolution is not about that. What the green revolution did um, basically meant to increase the food supply for the whole world, or for places that definitely needed an increase in food supply. And to try to end famine, hunger. Which are amazing goals, right? We don't want people to go hungry. We want to have the maximum amount of food available to us. Um, but there's definitely drawbacks to that. There's an environmental consequence for what we needed to do in order to make all of this food or food become more plentiful. And the main way that's done is with fertilizers and mechanized equipment, things like tractors. Okay, so just we probably should call it something else instead of the green revolution, the mechanized farming revolution. But that just stuck. So here are the things we're just going to kind of talk about, positive and negative, what things that have occurred because of the green revolution. And touch upon GMOs, which you may have heard of, genetically modified organisms, fertilizers, irrigation, get the nutrients to help plants grow, and of course, the water. We all know, take care of plants that they need water. And we have an idea that nutrients are important as well. And pesticides. So killing insects, but also fungus and rodents cannot be ignored. So the Green Revolution started with this guy named Norman Borlaug. He was an agronomist. Let me write out his name. So Norman He is an agronomist. And for those of you that don't know what an agronomist is, and I did not know until after I got my degree in biology, that is a soil scientist. Embarrassingly, when I went to become a teacher, I had to train. I had to go take a class where I was a lab assistant, help with labs, and help teach one lab intro. Anyway, my teacher, my professor that I was studying under for that class, he said he was an agronomist. And I'm like, what is that? So that was kind of embarrassing. But you won't have that problem because now you'll know. But he was from Minnesota, and he had some research. He set up some research stations in the Yaqui Valley in the state of Sonora. And then also in the Chapingo, which is a town, I believe, in the Texcoco state, right by Mexico City, it looks like. And the methods he used to increase soil fertilizer, to use pesticides, to take advantage of the amazing climate in Mexico. Mexico has the ability to have two harvesting seasons because of its proximity to the equator. He just was able to accomplish really amazing things with the crop yields using these methods of mechanization, using irrigation, using fertilizers. And you can see right here from the 1950s, all Mexico, India, Pakistan were all pretty much the same in terms of their yield. And I mean, look at Mexico; they just by far exceeded um, India and Pakistan with what they were able to create over there. Um, everybody was able to increase with these methods, but Mexico had amazing results, and it led to a presidential medal of, I think this is President George W. Bush in 2004, awarding scientists medals. Dr. Borlaug is here. I believe that's him. So that's where it came from, and it encompasses these basic realms. Varieties that we select that grow best and grow in the greatest density using fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, not just hauling cow manure around. Pesticides and herbicides to help keep what we have growing for us and not going anywhere else. Irrigating those crops, bringing water from surface sources, pumping it from underground, building dams, and then mechanizing, using tractors, other sorts of farm equipment. So let's start out, just talk about these varieties. This could be through artificial selection, where humans or farmers take the varieties that work best over time, breed them together, and then over time we have higher yielding varieties, and then they can be genetically modified. So you can take genes from other species and insert them into current, the crop that you want in order to get a result. An example of this would be BT corn. Basically, a gene from a bacteria will be placed into the BT, into the corn, and that will allow it to resist pests from eating it. Basically, it's an antibiotic a chemical that the corn will produce that will prevent insects from eating it. I'll say reduce. um, reduce pest damage, we'll say. And that's good because if you can just have the plant itself create the pesticide, then you won't have to apply pesticide to the plant. So that can help reduce the need to keep applying pesticides to the plants. Okay. Also, you can have drought resistant varieties. Find varieties that can take less water, so drought resistant, salt resistant. Some soils are saltier, more saline, so you can have salt resistant varieties. You can also have varieties that have more vitamins. There's a type of corn that makes beta carotene, basically vitamin A. And then people won't have vitamin A deficiency. So there's really amazing, great things you can do with having these different varieties. And we'll get into more of these later. Chemical fertilizer. So this mainly means Um, Nitrogen fertilizers that use the Haber-Bosch method. Basically, you take nitrogen from the air, you add hydrogen, usually from a natural gas source, and you create nitrates from that. And then these nitrates, these are applied to crops. And this is great. It greatly. This is probably the single biggest difference it makes in terms of growing more food. Adding these nitrogen chemical fertilizers. Probably the single biggest one. You just have way more crops, way more fertility. But remember, the trade-off, we're always talking about trade-offs. You have all this extra fertilizer, but a lot of it runs off into rivers and streams and then poisons those rivers and streams and poisons groundwater. And humans, we get our water that we need to drink and use from the ground, from these rivers. So we essentially poison ourselves by using these. So it's always a trade-off we're looking at here. And it just takes a lot of fossil fuels to make this. So you need fossil fuels in the starting in this hydrogen. This is natural gas, methane. Let me just put methane there. That's what when you turn on the stove, if you have a gas stove, that's what you're using, methane. CH4. So you need a lot of natural gas to go into it, but also to power the process. It takes a lot of energy to get that nitrogen out of the air and to create that nitrate fertilizer. So let's see, fossil fuel intensive, very intensive. So problems, remember, runoff. You got those instead of going into the plants, you have it going into the rivers, streams, creating lots of problems. And similar thing you have with pesticides and herbicides. Remember, we're trying to kill insects. Keep our insects, they can really go through our crops, and to some extent also fungus. In Mexico, they had it in parts of the United States called rust, where that's a fungal infection that kills a lot of plants. So insects, fungus, and rodents are controlled via the pesticides and herbicides. You might guess those kill weeds. Okay, any plants you don't want growing there. And again, you're going to have problems. This really, it greatly enhances your yields, right? You get a lot more left over, but on the downside, you have the runoff. You don't want this in your river either. You got things can get contaminated. Like we can end up eating some of these on the crops. Then you have, other effects of human health, bioaccumulation. These this buildup of these chemicals in our tissues. Then biomagnification, which is in food chains. That's why they tell women that are pregnant not to eat tuna, because tuna you get a lot of biomagnification through the food chain. So the food that tuna tend to have a lot of mercury, especially in their bodies. Irrigation systems, okay? You're putting a lot of, you got to have water on the crops, right? So a lot of different ones. I'll show you an example later. You got spray, drip, And that's something we talk or you hear a lot about now, drip irrigation, to try to really cut down on our water use, at our homes, but also, of course, we're mainly talking about, industrial scale agriculture here. And then furrow and others we can get into later. And this requires oftentimes the use of dams, surface channels, and pipes like we have here in California. Also groundwater pumping in order to do this, because you don't always have a lot of rain falling. So when that doesn't happen, then they start pumping the groundwater up. Mechanization. So here we're talking about tractors, combines, other harvesting machines, all powered by fossil fuel. And that's, a problem. You have all that fossil fuel, but, the good thing is you can cover way, way more ground with these machines, way more than you could with people. And people, we hire 1,000 people to harvest these crops. You're going to use a lot of fossil fuel supporting them, of course, the way we do things. So, but you're still looking at a lot of, intense impacts that way. Here are, pictures of rice. We do a lot of rice production here in California. So that is one, plant that's really, grown a lot more successfully and effectively with all these green techniques. If you fly over the United States, you will see a lot of this. These are called center pivot irrigation system, where you have in the middle of these circles you have the water, and then there is I need to show you a picture of this. Oh, I didn't. You have basically a pipe on wheels that kind of goes around that center pivot, and it's a very efficient way to water crops very precisely. You get a whole bunch of circles from that, and we'll get into that more. Here, the big scale, this kind of gives you a good sense. This takes a lot of money, uses a lot of land. This is not like small family farmer stuff. This is the shift to these large agribusinesses, which you've got to buy all this equipment, all this land, but you can be very efficient, create a lot of food. And this is how probably 90% of farming is done in this country, but also around the world. This is wheat farming, I think. Here in California, we're known for almonds. This is how they they harvest almonds. They take this device, this machine, and it grabs the trunk of the tree and just shakes the daylights out of that tree, and all the nuts fall off, and they're scooped up from the ground, and they fall. Some of them fall, but you see, it looks like they're sweeping them up, and then it's scooped up into the device here. Also big in California, tomatoes. This is how they do tomatoes. It basically gets scraped up off the ground, conveyor belt takes the tomatoes up here. Usually there's a person back there, I think, on the side that kind of aids in the sorting and selecting. But you can imagine how much more efficient just driving this thing back and forth across the field will be. This is rice farming. This is a rice combine, very similar to wheat. And this would be the application of pesticides. Think about, and fertilizers too. You can put almost anything you need to inside that tank and then apply it to your crops. So, the Green Revolution, just to wrap it up, really increase our ability to grow food around the world, which is great. Any hunger that happens nowadays is basically because food can't get to people. Not that we don't have enough somewhere in the world, but we have all these downsides and their negative environmental impacts and the changes in the culture. You don't have farmers anymore. So now you have more people in cities. So kind of that urban rural balance that's really we see come up in our culture uh, is disruptive to our societies, and we need to better find methods to do that. Um, and it will lead to the second green revolution, which will come next.